Chief, if you keep living under this much stress, you may not have much time. Your children still need you.
Daddy! You're home! We waited for you.
I'll always come home to you. Always.
Big brother, I only need another 150 million.
And don't forget my Dubai trip next month. You know your brother never says no.
We'll talk tomorrow. Brother, I really need your help with this. Do not worry, consider it done.
Chief Ibizonia was the kind of man every family prayed to have. As one of the richest businessmen in Africa, he had more than enough wealth to live comfortably for the rest of his life. But instead of keeping it all to himself, he spent years making sure no one around him ever lacked anything. If a relative was in trouble, he was the first person they called because they already knew his answer. His kindness didn't stop with his siblings. He paid university fees for nieces and nephews, cleared hospital bills for distant relatives, bought houses for his aging parents, and rescued family businesses that had failed more than once. To everyone else, Chief Ibizonia wasn't just a brother or a son. He had become the family's provider. But among everyone who depended on him, there were only two people who truly owned his heart. 8-year-old Zara and Jason had already lost their mother years earlier, leaving Chief Ibizonia to raise them alone. No matter how busy his day became, he never allowed business to steal the moments that mattered most. To the outside world, Chief Ibizonia seemed to have everything a man could ever dream of: wealth, respect, influence, and a beautiful family. But behind every smile was a burden no one else could see. Day after day, the weight of carrying an entire family rested on his shoulders, yet he never complained. One evening, after another long day of solving everyone else's problems, his body finally began to protest. What started as a mild dizziness quickly became something he could no longer ignore. Concerned for his health, Chief Ibizonia quietly visited his personal physician the following morning. It was a visit he intended to keep secret from everyone, especially his children. After studying the results for several moments, Dr. Hassan slowly removed his glasses. The expression on his face was enough to tell Chief Ibizonia that something wasn't right. The doctor's warning lingered in Chief Ibizonia's mind for days. For the first time in years, he began to realize that money could solve almost every problem except time. And if time ever ran out, there was only one question that truly terrified him. That night, after putting Zara and Jason to bed, he found himself unable to sleep. Hoping to distract his troubled mind, he switched on the television. A movie was already playing, one that would soon change everything. The film told the heartbreaking story of another wealthy father whose sudden death turned his children into strangers in their own home. The people who once smiled around them slowly revealed their true intentions, treating the innocent children as unwanted burdens while fighting over the man's fortune. When the movie finally ended, Chief Ibizonia didn't move. His eyes slowly drifted toward a family photograph sitting beside the television, a picture of himself, Zara, and Jason smiling together. At that very moment, a frightening thought crossed his mind. If the same thing happened to him, Would his own children suffer the same fate? For the next few days, Chief Ibithonia tried convincing himself that he was simply overthinking. After all, his family had stood beside him for years. They celebrated with him, laughed with him, and constantly reminded him how much they loved him. Surely they would never abandon his children, or would they? The doubt refused to disappear. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had never truly discovered whether the people around him loved him or simply loved the life he provided. There was only one way to find out. The following morning, Chief Ibithonia invited only 2 people he trusted completely to a private meeting: his longtime lawyer, Barrister Okonkwo, and his personal physician, Dr. Hassan. What he was about to tell them would leave both men speechless. After explaining everything that had been weighing on his heart, Chief Ibithonia revealed the unthinkable. He wanted the world to believe he was dying, and eventually that he was gone. Not because he wanted revenge, but because he wanted the truth. If his children were ever left alone in this world, he needed to know who would stand beside them when he no longer could. Although both men tried convincing Chief Ibithonia to abandon the idea, his mind had already been made up. This wasn't about testing people's loyalty to him anymore. It was about protecting the only 2 people he loved more than his own life. If his family truly loved his children, the test would prove it. But if they didn't, he needed to know before it was too late. The plan began quietly. Over the following weeks, Chief Ibithonia slowly stepped away from public appearances. Meetings were cancelled, charity events were postponed. Rumours about his declining health spread faster than anyone expected. As concern grew across the country, his relatives rarely left his side. Every visitor arrived carrying flowers, prayers, and words of encouragement. Looking at them, anyone would have believed they were the most loving family in the world. Chief Ibithonia smiled politely, but deep inside, he knew the real test had not even begun. Unknown to the rest of the family, another part of the plan was already underway. While everyone focused on Chief Ibithonia's condition, trusted technicians were quietly installing hidden cameras throughout the mansion. Every hallway, every living room, every important corner of the house would soon reveal the truth no one could hide. As the weeks passed, Chief Ibithonia's condition appeared to worsen. The once energetic businessman could barely leave his hospital bed. Every visit became more emotional than the last, and soon even the strongest members of the family began preparing themselves for the inevitable. Despite his failing health, there was one thing Chief Ibithonia never stopped doing. Every single day, he asked to see Zara and Jason. They were too young to understand everything that was happening, but they understood enough to know that their father was slowly slipping away. Several weeks later, Chief Ibithonia's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. Despite every effort made by his medical team, there was nothing more they could do. In the early hours of the morning, Barrister Okonkwo received the call he had been dreading. According to Dr. Hassan, Chief Ibithonia had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Before his passing, Chief Ibithonia left one final instruction with his lawyer. He wanted news of his death kept strictly within the family until after his burial. Having lived most of his life in the public eye, his last wish was for Zara and Jason to grieve their father away from flashing cameras, reporters, and public attention. Though heartbroken, the family agreed to honor what they believed was his dying wish. For the first 2 days, the mansion was filled with tears, prayers, and endless condolences. Friends and relatives spoke warmly about Chief Ibidonia's generosity, remembering the countless lives he had touched. But as the days passed, something inside the house slowly began to change. By the third day, the atmosphere inside the mansion was no longer the same. The endless tears had begun to dry, and conversations slowly shifted away from grief. What started as quiet discussions about funeral arrangements gradually turned into whispers about businesses, properties, and the enormous fortune Chief Ibidonia had left behind. What none of them realized was that the very house they believed belonged to them now had eyes watching every corner. Every conversation, every decision, and every hidden intention was being recorded exactly as Chief Ibidonia had planned. At first, the changes were almost impossible to notice. The children were no longer invited to sit with the adults. Their questions were ignored. Their laughter became an inconvenience, and the warmth that had once filled the mansion slowly disappeared. For Zara and Jason, the house they had always called home was beginning to feel strangely unfamiliar. As the days went by, the conversations became bolder. The family no longer spoke in whispers. They assumed Chief Ibidonia was gone forever, and with him, any fear of being judged. Every room in the mansion slowly became the center of discussions about wealth, inheritance, and who deserved what. Meanwhile, Zara and Jason found comfort in the only place that still reminded them of their father, his bedroom. Every evening they quietly walked into the room, hugged one of his shirts, and prayed that somehow he would walk through the door again. But their little moment of comfort didn't last long. Before the week was over, someone else had already decided that the room no longer belonged to Chief Ibidonia or to his children. At first, Zara and Jason thought it was only their father's bedroom that had changed. They had no idea the changes were only beginning. Within days, every trace of Chief Ibidonia slowly began disappearing from the mansion, as though the family was trying to erase the man who had given them everything. Not everyone in the mansion had forgotten what Chief Ibidonia stood for. While the adults argued over wealth, Auntie Ngozi, the family's longtime housekeeper, remained the only person who treated Zara and Jason with the same love and kindness they had always known. She became their source of comfort in a home that no longer felt like home. The hidden cameras never stopped recording. Every smile, every decision, every act of kindness, and every act of betrayal was safely stored. Unknown to everyone inside the mansion, the truth was quietly building piece by piece, waiting for the day it would finally be revealed. As the days passed, Mama Grace began noticing the quiet changes around the mansion. Zara and Jason laughed less, smiled less, and spent most of their time alone. The home that had once echoed with joy had become strangely cold, and although she tried to comfort them, her words carried little weight against the decisions everyone else was making. One afternoon, the twins quietly wandered into their father's private study. Everything was exactly as he had left it. The smell of his favorite cologne still lingered in the room, making it feel as though he had only stepped outside for a moment. For a brief second, the children forgot he was gone. Their moment of peace was interrupted almost immediately. Emeka walked into the study, looked around the room, and calmly announced that it would soon become his new office. To him, it was simply another part of the inheritance. To Zara and Jason, it felt like losing their father all over again. Unable to remain silent any longer, Mama Grace finally spoke. She reminded her children that Chief Ibithonia had not even been buried yet, and that the mansion was still filled with the memories of the son who had spent his entire life caring for them. But her plea fell on deaf ears. Greed had already begun drowning out grief. 3 days after Mama Grace's warning, something happened that made even Auntie Ngozi stop and stare. Emeka had barely finished moving into Ibidonia's study when he started behaving as though the entire mansion already belonged to him. And apparently, one man's death had come with a very long shopping list. And Emeka wasn't the only one making plans. Adaeze had already started going through her brother's accounts, calculating how much she could take without anyone noticing. The woman who had once called Ibithonia her favourite brother was now treating his fortune like a prize waiting to be divided. But while the adults were busy counting what they thought they had inherited, 2 little children were counting something very different. The days since they had last heard their father's voice. And that was the moment Auntie Ngozi realized something was terribly wrong. These children weren't simply grieving their father anymore. They were beginning to feel abandoned by everyone who was supposed to protect them. The following morning, another decision was made without Zara or Jason being consulted. Their private tutor was dismissed, their weekend activities were cancelled, and the household staff were told to cut their expenses. Apparently, the children of a billionaire were now expected to learn how to live simply. Funny thing was, nobody had said that to the adults. That afternoon, Zara asked for something painfully simple. She wanted to visit her father's grave before the burial. She had convinced herself that if she could stand where he would be buried, maybe saying goodbye would finally make his death feel real. But before they could leave, Adaeze stopped them. The family had decided that the children should stay home and rest. Zara didn't understand why visiting her own father's grave had suddenly become an inconvenience, and for the first time since her father's death, she looked at an adult in that house and realized something she couldn't explain. These people were changing. What the family didn't know was that Chief Ibithonia was watching every second of it. In a quiet room miles away from the mansion, he sat in front of a wall of security monitors, watching his children search for comfort in a house he had spent years filling with love. And for the first time, the billionaire, who had always been able to solve every problem, had tears in his eyes. Chief Ibizonia wiped his tears and watched the screens a little longer. He had wanted answers, and now he was getting them. But what he saw was becoming harder to accept. The people he had spent years protecting were already treating his children like unwanted responsibilities. Yet, there was still one thing he hadn't seen. What would happen when the money they expected finally became available? The answer came sooner than expected. While Zara and Jason were still mourning their father, Emeka and Adaeze began spending money as though the inheritance had already been handed to them. Cars were ordered, vacations were planned, expensive purchases arrived at the mansion almost every day. And the man paying for all of it was supposed to be lying 6 feet underground. But then came the decision that finally broke Chief Ibizonia's heart. His own brother decided that the children could no longer remain in the mansion once the funeral was over. They would be sent away to live under someone else's care. While the family enjoyed the fortune their father had spent his entire life building, that was enough. Chief Ibizonia had seen everything he needed to see. He had given his family time to show him who they really were, and they had answered him without knowing he was listening. Now, there was only one thing left to do. The day of Chief Ibizonia's private burial finally arrived. His family gathered to say goodbye to a man they believed was gone forever. The prayers ended. The coffin was lifted toward the grave. Then, just before it was lowered, a familiar voice came from behind them. Everyone froze, but Zara and Jason didn't. They had only one word left in their hearts. Daddy! Then came the second shock. The coffin was opened, and there was nobody inside. Ibizonia hadn't come back to frighten them. He had come back with proof. He had spent years taking care of everyone. But when he disappeared, only a few remembered to take care of what mattered most to him. From that day on, Ibizonia knew exactly who his family was. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional stories like this. And tell us in the comments, was Ibizonia right to test his family?